It's Von Morris. I don't know, I just wanted to go over this Stono Rebellion book. It's called Stono, Documenting and Interpreting a Southern Slave Revolt, edited by Mark M. Smith. I wanted to go through this with y'all to show y'all a distinction of how they castigated Negroes and Moors in the same light. Let me show y'all this. And black. Let me show y'all this. It says Friday, September 28th, 1739. A man brought the news that the Negroes or Moorish slaves are not yet pacified. See how he said Moorish or Negro slaves? Because in this time, both words were synonymous. But we are Moors before we're Negroes, because Negro just means, it's Spanish for black object. If the word brown in Spanish is moreno, but if you ask a Spanish person what moreno means, they'll tell you a free person. So let's get this in context. So a man brought news that the Negroes or Moorish slaves are not yet pacified. So we weren't sweet. We wasn't riding with any of the BS. If they came with us talking about, hey, come over here, nigger, and it was going to be smoke in the city. If you understand that, if y'all got old aunts and y'all understand what that terminology mean, it was going to be bowling balls. Like, but anyway, they are not yet pacified. So we're not yet domiciled. We're not yet dumbed down. We are not yet ready to acquiesce our rights. We have our full life. Okay. We're not yet pacified, but are roaming around in gangs in Carolina forest, and that 10 of them had come as far as the border of this country just about 2 days ago. So it's a lot of stuff with that. Peep how they're referring to these so-called counties and so-called states as countries. If you look up the Black's Law Dictionary look up the Black's Law Dictionary of state, it'll show you one of the meanings is district. Look up the meaning of district. A district is a country. So understand that when they're calling these states, they're really European countries, if you will. It's all colored, so don't get caught up in the words, but it's a way of them castigating our empire into so-called countries. So, and it's funny how we're roaming around in gangs in Carolina, but the prophet, peace be upon him, was born in Carolina. Born at the territory calling itself Carolina. Let me correct that. So Forrest and that of 10 had come as far as the border of this country 2 days ago. In answer to the request in the inhabitation of Savannah to use Moorish slaves for their work. So they were asking the so-called slave masters if they wanted to use Moors for their work. Watch the reply. In answer to the request of the inhabitants of Savannah to use Moorish slaves for their work, the Lord trustees gave their simple negative answer that they will never permit a single black to come into the country. Notice how they call the Moors black. They're castigating them. They're trying to call them Negro, but they was Moors, and they was riding for their people. And watch how they was riding. We will never permit a single black to come into the country, for which they have sufficient grounds to aim at the happiness of the subjects. Mr. Oglethorpe, this is a so-called slave master, Mr. Oglethorpe, slave master. See, we're going to deal with this. They had a system back in the day called indentured servitude, where if you were somebody not from this country, a migrant, right? If you came here from another country, but you were upstanding. So say you were an artist from another country, not of servitude. You are free status, and you you controlled your own business, like you sold artwork. If you came over to this land and got permission, you would be brought in as an art worker, and you wouldn't be put under the demographics as somebody that came over here as a Slav, because a Slav from Slovakia, those people have a long history of going to other lands and working for those lands, because those lands that they come from, Slovenia and Slovakia, weren't upstanding in the position that they were. They couldn't get any tributaries or breakdowns from the king, trickling downs from the king or the empire or the sultan of that land. I think Slovenia was ran by, at one point, Vlad the Impaler, who was also a dirty Moor. But y'all gotta check me out on that, but we'll get back to this. So Mr. Oglethorpe told us that here, Mr. Oglethorpe told us here that the misfortune with the Negro rebellion had begun on the day of the Lord. So it's a lot that we got to deal with this. Like, I'm going to go back to, because basically you got Moors riding to get Negroes out of so-called slavery of their master, so-called Mr. Oglethorpe, so-called master, so-called, everything is so-called because it's all connotative linguistics. So Mr. Oglethorpe, they were actually riding to get their brothers out on a Sunday when they weren't ready for that type of rebellion. Watch how we work. I'm gonna go back though so we can get it all into clarity. My fault for the thumb to keep coming into the video. All right. So RK. Lord trustees have given the simple negative answer that they will never permit a black, aka Moorish, to ever come into this country, for which they have sufficient grounds that aim at the happiness of the subjects. So they're portraying the subjects that's working for them as being happy. There's nothing happy about working for somebody against your will. So we go on. Mr. Oglethorpe told us here that the misfortune with the Negro rebellion had begun on the day of the Lord, which these slaves must desecrate with work, and in other ways at the desire, command, and compulsion of their master, and that we could recognize a just teleonus in it. So let's get all that into clarity. The Negro Rebellion began on a Sunday, the day of the Lord. The slaves must desecrate with work in other ways at the desire and command compulsion of their master. So basically, because of these revolts were taking place, they were making the slaves work double time to pay off all the debts that were incurred from the revolt. Because in revolts, you lose slaves, you lose money, because crops are burned, houses are burned. Sometimes they would take cattle. Sometimes they would take, always they would invade the ammunition farms and barns. So they would take all the ammunition. So this is a lot of money being lost because now they don't have the workers. Imagine right now if you're working at Septus or, one of these corporations and y'all go on strike. When you go on strike, it's going to impede the income of the corporation. So they're forced to pay you more or come down to a certain agreement with you to get you to come back to work. So this is the same situation. What they're saying is that Mr. Oglethorpe told us here that the misfortune with the Negro Rebellion, aka the Moorish Rebellion, had begun on the day of the Lord, which these slaves must desecrate with work. So they got to pay off the debt of so-called Moors trying to get them free by working. Why don't they just ride with the Moors and get free instead of working and, you know, hurting the movement. Anyway, watch how Mother Nature plays her smooth hand into this. And it also says, in a compulsion of the masters, that we could recognize a just teleonus in it. Just teleonus means the right of retaliation. So they were saying that they could recognize a right of retaliation in the fact that the slaves were so-called revolting. That's weird. So anyway, I, however, ponder the fact that the mill on Old Ebenezer is so ruined by a flood on Sunday that the work that was done then through necessity by the servants did no good. So the divine spectacle in that is that after these Moors rode to get their brothers out of so-called, I don't even want to call it slavery. We're going to call it, for this video, and I'm at 11, so we got to wrap it up. We won't call it slavery. We'll call it prisoners of war, right? So when these Moors rode for their brothers, there was prisoners of war. On the day of the Lord, Mother Nature returned the favor by making a flood. Oh, my fault. I thought something happened. Anyway, she returned the favor by making a flood. So I'll read it again. I, however, pondered the fact that the old mill in Ebenezer was ruined by a flood on Sunday, and that the work that was done by through necessity by the servants did no good. So all the work that the slaves or so-called blacks or so-called Moors that was doing, they wanted to stay servitude to their masters. It did no good because the floods ruined it anyway. So, you know, why wait for the floods of the currents of time to claim your nationality and declare your nationality and follow the Prophet Noble Drew Ali and get clear with who your ancestors are and who your divine prophets were before Noble Drew Ali and who the Moors were before time immemorial, because there was never a time when man was not. Why not get that corrected and get that understood and learn how to ride with the flow of the flood so you don't get caught up in it? Why not do that instead of going against the grain and accepting to be a slave and getting caught up in the flood? Islam and honest to Noble Drew Ali. I am Qasir. It's always stuff banging around in this house. I am Qasir Effie Raj L. And I will be signing out on a peaceful, blissful building on today. And I think I got one more today for y'all, but that'll be on another video. Islam.